Okay, the Washington Wizards. Interesting year. A mid-year. Yeah, those are my best descriptors for their season. Interesting and mid. So the headlines for them, they were really strong out the gates, starting 10-3, but they regressed to the mean. Bradley Beal had a very interesting season, and then the KP trade was probably the most headliney thing. But starting with the first headline, they were strong out the gates. Their Lakers pickups for the Russell Westbrook trade, Kyle Kuzma, KCP, Montrezl Harrell, they all were balling out. Obviously, Harrell was traded midway through the year, right before the All-Star break. But in his time in Washington, he was putting up some ridiculous fucking numbers. He was scoring in bunches and not that many minutes played in typical Montrezl Harrell fashion. And his production from the center position was really important because they're going to miss a lot of offense with Thomas Bryant being out for the first half of the season. Daniel Gafford isn't really a offense producer or creator from the center position, so Harrell was that main source of offensive production at the 5. And in his time there, he was thriving offensively. Kyle Kuzma had a really good year. He was aggressive. It seemed like he was out to prove a lot of things from the jump, especially with the slander he was getting unnecessarily from a lot of Laker fans. I'm a Laker fan, and I will tell you the Lakers have the worst and most delusional fan base in the entire league. A lot of people were slandering his name, especially on the way out, and I'm really happy that he was able to shut a lot of people up. Really had a really good, solid season. He was the most consistent source of offense for the Wizards, with Bradley Beal missing half the year. And KCP had a really good year as well. He always plays hard on the defensive end. He's able to catch and make a decision immediately. He's either catching and shooting or catching and trying to attack a hard closeout. He was really efficient from the three-point line this year, 39%. Washington's best shooter by far. I mean, apart from Rui Hachimura just going bonkers from three-point land when he returned. Throughout the year, since KCP was able to play 77 games, he was their most consistent shooter. So the Lakers' pickups from the Russell Westbrook trade was the reason why the Wizards were able to perform at such a high level early on in the season. But after those 13 games, teams were really able to game plan for them. They weren't going to survive much longer with Bradley Beal kind of playing below his standard of stardom. Spencer Dinwiddie just really struggling in his time with Washington. Deni Avdija not really being used correctly on the offensive end. And not having that much high-level defensive personnel. Everybody was just waiting for the Wizards to regress to the mean. And they did. Now, talking about Bradley Beal in more in depth. Like I said, he struggled early on. He wasn't really shooting well from three-point land. He wasn't really able to create that well from three-point land. Yeah, that was the main bad thing about his season, and that was really what was holding him back early on. He was able to get much more into rhythm as the season progressed, and then he suffered an injury midway through the season, I think right before the All-Star break. He injured his wrist and then had to undergo season-ending surgery to it, so he was going to be shut down for the year. But yeah, it was just an interesting, out-of-pace, kind of uncharacteristic start of the year for Bradley. Especially after the prior 2 seasons, he scored 30 points per game. This year, he was at 23, and he shot 30% from three-point land. I don't know. Interesting season for him. Hopefully, he can bounce back next season, because if the Wizards want to be relevant, he's going to be the guy to, put them into relevancy. And lastly, we got to talk about the KP trade. Now, it was a good trade for the Wizards. In terms of teams that were, everybody was thinking that we're going to trade for Porzingis, it was obvious he was going to be on the market. The Wizards were not at the top of the list. And they got him for pretty good value, like a struggling Spencer Dinwiddie who was doing his thing in Dallas, especially in the playoffs now, but he was struggling in Washington. They were able to offload him to get Porzingis, and they got a second-round pick from Dallas as well. It was a pretty good trade for Washington, and it was a trade that worked out for both teams because obviously Dinwiddie balled out against Utah in the playoffs, and Porzingis really seemed a lot more comfortable in Washington. Now, he didn't play until March, which was 20 days after the trade happened, but in his time in Washington, he put up 22 per game, 1.5 blocks, 9 rebounds on 48% from the field and 37% from 3. Now, if Porzingis is playing like this, then he can definitely be the second best player on a playoff caliber team. And if he can stay healthy, of course. Now we're going to talk about players a bit more in depth. The top performers are obviously Beal, Porzingis, and I'm throwing Kuzma into that category as well. Beal is their franchise player, going to be their leading shot creator when he returns. He had a pretty similar situation to Damian Lillard this year, who I talked about in the last Outlook. Kind of struggled from outside, hampered by injuries. Team wasn't playoff bound, so he got shut down for the year. So the interesting thing for Beal is that he has a player option for this upcoming season, and it's not known if he's going to exercise it or not. I think he'll probably decline it. It doesn't mean if he declines it, he's leaving Washington. He might just want an extension from Washington, something more long-term, get that more immediate instead of waiting a year for the extension or waiting a year for a long-term contract. He might just want that long-term contract now. Talked a little bit about KP already. Capable go-to scorer in a lot of different situations, in the high post-up, in the pick and roll of the dude at 7'2", and in the dunker position. And of course in the pick and pop, because he's such a high-level shooter for being 7'3". And because of his handle, he's able to attack on the perimeter against slow-footed bigs and against anybody if they close out on him too hard, and he's able to finish at the rim at a high level. Diving into his fit, I think he would work well as a great offensive duo with Bradley Beal. Both can light it up from outside, both can create inside and out. I think this could be a really high-level dynamic duo offensively. And then in terms of defense, we know Porzingis is going to be a high-level defender at the 5 position. I love his defensive fit with Hachimura at the 4, who's still improving as a versatile defensive 4-man. I think that can be a really good defensive 4-5 combo. Talking about Kyle Kuzma a bit more, most consistent source of offense last year when combining his production with his availability. He had more on-ball responsibilities, and that showed his improvement as a passer. He was able to show that signs of his prowess as a passer in LA with really tough no-look passes or cross-court passes or tough drop-off passes from his drives, but he wasn't able to showcase it consistently because the ball was out of his hands a lot and he really became an off-ball guy. But with more on-ball responsibilities, he showed just how good of a passer he was. So his fit, this is where it gets a bit more interesting. He's got 2 more years on his contract. I don't think he's the long-term starting 4, especially he's gotten better on the defensive end, but Rui Hachimura is still on this team, and he has a bit more defensive capabilities than Kyle Kuzma because he's a bit more spry. He's stronger, so he can defend. He can actually play small ball 5. So Rui is more versatile on the defensive end, and he has more upside. Given that Rui really improved as a 3-point shooter, he's always been a great inside finisher. So Rui is still improving. He's more capable on the defensive end, and he's 2 years younger. So Rui is probably ideally the long-term fit at the 4 position, even though Kyle was really good this year. Going forward for Washington, he might convert into this team's 6th man, the go-to shot creator off the bench, because he's a great offensive player. Looking into prospects for Washington, we have to start out with Denny. His strengths are his secondary playmaking and defensive versatility and his rebounding. Now, I would say playmaking in general was his strength, but he didn't really get to be the primary playmaker at all in Washington. Some of it is his fault and some of it is Wes Unselt's fault. So that's why I'm saying his secondary playmaking was a strength, because when he had space, he was able to make great passes in the fast break. He was able to make good reads in terms of making the second pass, if he was the wide open guy and defenses were closing out on him, he was able to make the appropriate decision out of that type of action. So that's where he was able to showcase his playmaking prowess. And then in terms of defensive versatility, he got a lot better on the defensive end compared to his rookie year. He got better and he got a lot more opportunity and time against the team's best perimeter options, mainly wings, of course. He was defending LeBron late in games. He was honestly the best player for the Wizards to throw against LeBron when they played the Lakers, and he was doing a decent job, honestly. Because he's 6'7" or 6'8", he's going to have a lot of versatility, so he's going to be able to guard a lot of positions, and he rebounded at a really high level. He was an aggressive rebounder this season. Given that he wasn't really on the ball as much, he probably prioritized doing things off the ball like improving as a shooter, being an aggressive rebounder on the defensive and offensive glass. Now, in terms of weaknesses, though he improved a little bit as a shooter, that's still a weakness in his game, just being more consistent. He has really good form. His form is it looked really good this season, but for some reason the consistency just isn't really there. And I alluded to this already, his half-court creation as a shot creator and just as a playmaker is a weakness due to his handle. He doesn't have the tightest, most dynamic handle. So I guess for Wes Unseld to have more confidence, for him to create in the half-court setting, Avdia's got to tighten up that ball handling ability. Next is Corey Kissberg. His strengths are shooting and finishing. Coming out of Gonzaga, he was the best shooter in the class, in the 2021 class, by far. Now, he struggled early on from outside. He was shooting like 27% over the first, I think, month. But after that struggle, he kicked up his three-point percentage a lot. December, 36%. January, 35%. In February, he struggled. But to end the season, he was really strong from outside, shooting 39% in March and April. So yeah, though he averaged out at 35% from outside on the entire year, he's going to be a much better shooter in that for the remainder of his career. Now, I say finishing. This might surprise you, but Corey Kissberg shot 79.1% at the rim. Like, from 0 to 3 feet, he shot 79.1%. Now, this was mainly just off of cutting, running hard in the fast break, and just, like, finishing strong. Like, the dude is 6'7". He's got sneaky athleticism because he's white. That was a joke. I'm not being racist. That was a joke because everybody says sneaky athleticism for the white dude. But yeah, he was able to convert at a high rate. Just like a lot of his points came in the fast break. Just being able to fill the lane correctly, make opportunistic off-ball cuts as well with teams overplaying him from three-point land. Yeah, he was just a really good finisher. And from like floater range too, because he's not the like most explosive athlete, he went to the floater a lot. Like 13% of his shots came from 3 to 10 feet, and he converted those at 51.5%. His weaknesses lie in his perimeter defense and his ball handling. Teams kind of just burned him on the perimeter. He doesn't have the most lateral quickness. In ball handling, he wasn't somebody that was going to create on the perimeter kind of at all. He's not a horrible ball handler, but it's not a strength of his. It's a weakness, but I think he can get better at that with time. So the determiners on his game, it's going to rely on him becoming an elite level shooter. I'm talking like 39% every season for the rest of his career, preferably 40. He needs to be a marksman from out there because that was his main, drawing point coming out of college. And just being a better perimeter defender. If he never really develops his ball handling, fine. There's always going to be room on a team for a 40% three-point shooter. But he's also going to have to be at least decent perimeter defender. He's got good size at 6'7", 6'8", so he can defend either the 2 or the 3, maybe even small ball 4s if he can get a bit stronger. But mainly, he's just got to be a more reliable perimeter defender. Lastly, Rui Hachimura. His strengths lie in his inside scoring, defensive versatility, and his three-point shooting. He's always been a high-level inside scorer coming out of college, and he displayed that his first 2 years. He really improved his inside scoring in his second year because the dude is like really strong. He's got decent footwork down low, and he's a really aggressive inside scorer. Now, the thing that was going to improve his ceiling was his development on the defensive end. Coming out of college, there's a thing about would he be a small forward or power forward, because people weren't sure at what position he could defend at a high level in the NBA. But he's worked on his defense, and he's a good perimeter defender. He can defend down low. He's got like a good combination of strength and mobility. So he's really developed as this like versatile defender that can guard a lot of positions. And then lastly, his three-point shot. He shot like 44% from 3 after struggling with the 3 tenfold in his first 2 seasons. Yeah, 44.7% from 3 this year after in his rookie year 28 and his sophomore year 33. This year on 3 attempts per game, 44.7%. I heard that he improved his shot mechanics. His form is a lot more fluid. So if that's the case, then it obviously worked. But I want to see him sustain that for next year. His consistency from three-point land is going to be a big determiner for his ceiling, and being more consistent on the defensive end. He obviously has the physical tools, but he still needs to work on the mental aspect of the defensive game. Diving into the offseason, the Wizards have a chance to jump into the top 4, but it's more likely that they find themselves in the 10 to 11 range. So if they do jump into the top 4, Jayden Ivy definitely is the best player for them to target. They need some high-level talent at the point guard position. Jayden Ivy is that. He is a scorer. He's one of the best shot creators on the perimeter. He improved as a playmaker in his second year at Purdue, and he is extremely athletic. So that's the definition of high-level talent at the point guard position, and that's exactly what Washington needs. But if they don't get into the top 4, Ty Washington is the best target for them. He's the next best point guard in the class, really solid playmaker, efficient shooter from 3. He's got good feel in terms of floaters and stuff. Solid defender as well. He's not the highest level creator from outside or getting to the rim, but he can work on that, of course. But yeah, if they find themselves in the 10 to 11 range, Ty is the best guy for them to get. Next best, I talked about AJ Griffin and Benedict Mathurin so much in these offseason outlooks, but yeah, both of those guys would be great for Washington to add because they need defensive help and 3-point shooting help. In terms of free agency, the significant free agents for them are Bradley Beal and Thomas Bryant. Bradley Beal, technically, because he has a player option for this upcoming season, and we don't know if he's going to exercise it or not. Thomas Bryant is going to be a free agent, unrestricted. I don't really know how Washington views him. I don't really know how significant in terms of long-term plans they view him, because he was great 2 years ago as a rim-protecting, rim-running stretch 5. He was really prolific from outside. This year when he came back, he struggled from three-point land. And the Wizards have Daniel Gafford now, who's a much higher level defender and much more athletic rim runner, quicker, bouncier. So it's not really essential for the Wizards to bring back Thomas Bryant, and especially in adding Kristaps Porzingis as well. So I think he's just going to walk. His tenure in Washington is probably over. As for cap space, without Bradley Beal's contract on the books, they'd actually have $37 million. But if he exercises his player option, then they're going to be capped out. What Washington needs is a starting caliber point guard, or at least a top tier backup, and 3-and-D wings. So they could target Ricky Rubio. Rubio's never won a championship in his career, and it's not really likely for him to get that in Washington. But if he believes that they can be contending, then maybe he goes to Washington. I'm kind of talking myself out of Ricky Rubio. Yeah, he's not gonna join the Wizards, but Delon Wright would be a dope guy. He can fill in at starting point guard, but he'd really be a top tier backup. Same thing with Tomas Satoransky. He really, the dude's a really great playmaker. I think per 100 he got 9 assists per game. Oh yeah, per 100 possessions he got 12.8 assists. So he's always been a high level, high IQ playmaker. He can start at the point guard, but obviously that's just not ideal. But if they still need a backup point guard, they should definitely prioritize bringing him back. So now for some 3-and-D wings for Washington to target: Taurean Prince, Robert Covington, Otto Porter. Those are the best options for them. But the thing is, I don't really know how they're gonna get those guys, because they're gonna be capped out. And even if Beal declines his player option, they need all the money to re-sign him. So I don't know. They might not be able to get any of these guys besides maybe Tomas Satoransky on close to the minimum. In terms of the trade market in the offseason, Bradley Beal maybe, if they wanted to do a sign and trade, or I don't know, if Bradley Beal said he wanted out of Washington. But I don't think he does. I think he wants to remain in Washington, so that would be the only guy on the trade block if he wanted out, but I highly doubt it. And I don't really think there's anybody for Washington to target. I only have one prediction for Washington. I think they'll draft Ty Washington to address, the need for high-level talent at the point guard position. They're going to be around the 10th or 11th pick. They're not getting into the top 3 most likely, so I think it makes the most sense for them to target Ty Washington, because they have a lot of wings on this team that they have to get minutes for. So adding another young one doesn't really make the most sense. They have Porzingis at their starting 5, and they extended Daniel Gafford, so he's their long-term backup center, I guess. So it really makes the most sense for them to add more high-level talent at the point guard position. So the Wizards had quite a brilliant start to the regular season, going 10-3 in their first 13 games, but with Dinwiddie struggling early on, Beal not playing to the standard of the prior season, it was going to be hard for them to sustain success. Kuzma had a great resurgent year, proving that he wasn't someone simply carried by AD and LeBron. He himself is a talented scorer and an improving playmaker, but he wasn't going to carry this team offensively. Other factors contributed to the slide as well. Beal's injury before the All-Star break, Rui and Bryant missing the first 40 games, Avdija not being used correctly on the offensive end, and opposing teams simply game planning for the Wizards after shocking the league early on. On February 10th, they were able to offload a struggling Dinwiddie for Kristaps Porzingis, someone who can simply have a greater impact on the game than Dinwiddie ever could. He came over when Beal was shut down for the season, so the two weren't able to share the court. It'll be very interesting to see how they fare as a duo offensively. Looking into the offseason, the Wizards have a slim chance of jumping into the top 4, but it's much more likely their pick lands around 10 or 11, where I think they should target Ty Washington out of Kentucky. Behind Jayden Ivy, he's the next best point guard in the class, and the Wizards need to add more high-end talent at that position. I like Neto and Satoransky a lot, but they're not ideal long-term starting PGs. This team was a mess defensively and one of the worst producers from behind the arc, so in free agency, Tommy Shepard should focus on adding 3-and-D wings to address both deficiencies. Ultimately, this team can go in vastly different directions based on the future of Beal. If he either accepts his player option or signs a long-term extension, then the Wizards may go into buying mode, where prospects like Kissberg, Avdija, and the 2022 pick can become expendable if they showcase series value next season, and if a star becomes available to trade for. On the other hand, if Beal looks to sign elsewhere this offseason, the Wizards will finally go into rebuild mode, without really having anyone with franchise player type standing. Regardless, I don't like the position Washington's in. Even with a healthy Beal and Porzingis, both are big ifs, I don't think they're a lock to make the playoffs in the East next season. Two offensive stars, yet not a definite playoff team. If players like Avdija, Hachimura, and Kissberg don't take a significant step forward next season, the Wizards might be in NBA purgatory.
All my friends are dead, put me to the edge. All my friends are dead, push me to the edge.